Mark Ronson is producer and creator and host of a brand new show called Watch the Sound. I can say this as a whole, it really is a wonderful watch, Mark. I mean, you're someone who's a good friend of mine. I feel very comfortable saying that in front of the world. And I've known you a long, long time now. But hearing you being able to and watching you being able to kind of dive into your passion to this degree was just a joy. Like watching you get that involved in something that we hear the result of all the time, but we don't really get to see how you feel in those private moments. And it was beautiful. And so my question to kick this off, bro, is how was the experience for you making what I can only imagine was your dream TV show?
I mean, that's exactly what it is. It is my dream TV show. And I think when we started out, Kim Rosenfeld came to me as executive producer of the show and was like, I want to do a show, a TV series. Apple had just launched Apple TV. I want to do a TV show that's a bit like he referenced his TED talk that I'd done about sampling, because he was like, obviously I love music. I know what sampling is, but I never knew the minutia, the ins and outs. I never realized what a thread it is, not only through music, but just as a sort of like, we live in a sort of sample-based culture anyway, right? That's what TED Talks do usually. They take your thing and they lend it to some big picture. And he was like, I want to do a TV show that somehow does that. It's informative about music. It's fun. It's like the heads that know will still watch and enjoy it. And then people who don't know anything will be, engrossed, and they'll feel like they learned something and it's entertaining. So that was just where we started. And so then he hooked me up with Morgan Neville, this incredible director who had done a lot of stuff I love, like 20 Feet from Stardom and Won't You Be My Neighbor and a lot of stuff. And we just started to dream out this show, what it would be, how we could split it into episodes. And after a lot of like hours and hours of brainstorming and rambling and talking around it, we were just like, let's do 6 episodes, 6 subjects, reverb, distortion, synth, sampling, drum machines, and auto tunes, and talk about how they revolutionize music, and talk to the people who did your favorite stuff on them.
So what didn't make the cut? Out of if you've created a tight series of 6, we all know that there's a lot of ground that you could cover next, or you could have covered on this series. So what was the one that didn't make this series that you really were excited about, but you just didn't perhaps have the time or the headspace to be able to cover it as well?
I think there's probably so much, like what I don't know about music could fill an anthology of TV series, but I think these were the things that I could not necessarily talk the most expert about, but we could talk with the most passion about, because they've somehow threaded in and out. So I don't know if there was anything that, I mean, we went to, like, obviously reverb is more of like a concept even than we went, probably a little bit more big picture stuff on that. But there was nothing really that we're like, crap, I wish we could have got this one in. So I guess there's no season 2, unfortunately.
So going back to the TED Talk, it's the kind of thing that I think thrusts people who have a certain level of experience and passion for a subject. And it could be educational, it could be social, it could be activism. It covers a lot of ground, but the one thread that flows through that is, I think that it encourages people who don't public speak to public speak. And I want, because you want to be a part of it, rather than like, should I do it? It's like, well, I have to. It's a TED Talk. Of course I'm going to do it. Next thing you know, you're doing it, right? Was that the beginning of this kind of...
Wait, you were there. You were there in London, and I had a different... I remember you were the first person that you were like my first guinea pig audience, because I had a different TED Talk in my mind. This is going back to early 2014. And you were upstairs for me in London in the studio, and I was like, and you were like, all right. And you always just been like that with me, like, all right, let me see. What do you got? Like, what are you going to do? And I was like, okay. So I like set up this elaborate setup, and I was going to do something with like, I don't know, like samplers, and show people making it. And it was just like, at the moment, I was 20 seconds in doing it for you, I was like, this sucks. Apologizing already for the thing. I was like, this is going to be so boring. If I can't even keep Zane's attention, he knows how this works. What am I going to do? So that's right. So that's when I really switched it up, and it was like...
It was just a lot. That was all. It was just a lot. You were doing exactly what I was just saying, which was you were stepping into an opportunity and feeling the pressure of doing a TED Talk, rather than just doing the thing that you know the best and you can really talk about the best.
Yeah, I was trying to be some combination of like MacGyver and like Bill Nye. It was just so dumb.
I think you were trying to build an Akai S1000 like on the stage, like with
On
it.
the stage, out of 2 potatoes and some like tripwire.
What's interesting about it is that I remember that too, but I remember you being very nervous, but I understood why. I'd be incredibly nervous. That's my point. It's a big deal. And since then I feel like you've become not only more interested but more comfortable discussing your process and leaning into the process itself. You were genuinely quite quiet and weren't big on being interviewed before that. I feel like, unless it was your own music. Was that sort of the start of your like, there's something I can really gain out of being a part of the conversation, not just making the music that leads to the conversation?
I think when I started out, there were kids in my class and kids I was friends with that were like really amazing at an instrument. They could like shred ridiculously well or something. It was obvious like he's going to be a guitar player. He's going to do that. I wasn't good enough at anything that there was like a signpost saying like go this way. I wasn't any prodigy, so I didn't even know if I was going to make music. I just knew I wanted to be around it. So I wrote for metal fanzines. I did record reviews for like On the Go and like hip hop fanzines. I interned at Rolling Stone when I was like 12, 13, 14. So there's always been this side of my brain that's been as much fascinated music appreciation as somebody who also makes music. So this is kind of like this show is probably the best use of all those loves and manages to work them together because you're like I get to talk to Paul McCartney and like geek out over mellotrons and the drums from Tomorrow Never Knows, but then we take like some little Moog thing synth that he wrote and turn it into a song at the end of the episode as well. So it's a little bit like it's just like the perfect part of equal parts fan and creator or something.
I'm glad you said that. That's exactly where I was going was, you start out being a fan. I think everybody does, even people with this natural born gift who can pick up a guitar and instantly play like Steve Vai. Why do we always like use Steve Vai as the example of like incredible guitar players? I feel like that's always where we go.
Because he played a guitar with 2 necks that was like this, and nobody else can do that.
That's true.
And he did really shred, and in that era, like you're either gonna pick Yngwie or Joe Satriani or Steve Vai, and I'm gonna go Vai every time.
You're going to be a fan. And then if you're lucky, you find your way into the room and you start to find your role and what it is that you can contribute. And then your life begins ultimately. This is the perfect balance. This show, Watch the Sound, is the perfect balance of Mark Ronson, the fan, and Mark Ronson, the player. And so one of the things I've always found interesting when I'm talking to artists is I'm very much on the side of the fan. And you had to play that role a little bit in this show. You couldn't just be the guy who produced Paul McCartney. You had to approach Paul McCartney with a different kind of reverence, right?
Absolutely. Which is very natural. Like I actually don't have to really even pretend that much. I mean, it's the same thing with it's funny like the amount of people whose music I was really, really a fan of, like really important to me, like not just people I was casually listening to an album, Josh Homme, Q-Tip,
Beastie Boys.
yeah, Beastie Boys, Stevie Wonder, these people that I've worked with throughout my career that it's like pinch me, it's like how is this person who literally made the stuff that made me want to make music? So I'm still always half geeking out. I mean, at some point you got to like pull yourself together, man, and like start producing, and that's what you're there for. But interviewing someone like Denzel Curry, who's from like a new generation and completely like tearing up the rule book and doing cool shit, like I can't really assume that he knows anything I've done, really. I mean, sure, he's might have been to a wedding, he's heard Uptown Funk, but I think that it's interesting as well just talking to somebody for their thing. I don't know if Thurston Moore is especially well versed in like my catalog either. Like, so it's kind of cool to go in with those people that and just like there you're really just interviewer.
The humility is a part of anyone who knows you well becomes accustomed to your unique brand of humility. And at first, it's you put the humor in humility, even though I know that that's not a hybrid word.
Humility. That's pretty good.
I went for it,
and you did it.
but the humility is real, and so it makes sense when you say, for me, slipping back into fan mode was natural. So let me ask you this. At what point, and maybe it never will, but at what point did you stop feeling like an imposter or a pretender when you're in a room with incredible musicians, maybe early on in your career, and you're recognizing, wow, I had this opportunity here, somehow found myself in here. I'm not a fan anymore alone. I need to figure this out.
I think usually it's like the first moment that you do something in the studio that you can tell they're excited about. Because like you go in the studio with Paul McCartney, like not only are you working with one of the greatest minds, musical minds of all time, producer, songwriter, arranger, musician, all of it. You're also in the you're in the room with the ghosts of George Martin and Nigel Godrich and Elvis Costello and anyone who even produced a Paul McCartney record on top of it. That's it's like that's a very intimidating place to be. So you always have a day grace period, I feel like, with him. Like he like where everything in the studio looks like it's made from kryptonite and you're just like breaking and dropping. And then I think you have to get on with it. And the first time that I have something that I can just tell that I've like engross them or turn them on. Same thing with like, Josh from Queens of the Stone Age. Like I just did something that they wouldn't have done by themselves. So now I know I'm like in the room and they're confident. We're all confident that I deserve to be here. But
Can you give us an example, Mark? Like, I mean, either Paul or Josh, a specific example, a memory you have of working on both of those records, which are, if you're a Mark Ronson fan, a real production high points, where you were like, oh, I got their attention and they know that they're in good hands.
it hasn't happened yet. No, I think, yeah, there was like, actually, Paul McCartney said like one of the coolest things that he was like, he was going to put acoustic guitar down on this song Alligator. And I said, I had it all mic'd up and he started playing and he was like, it sounds like an acoustic guitar, but I want it to sound like a record. Like as if you just put the needle down on the, da da da. So we like ran it through this other mic and through the Fairchild and whatever. But that quote has stayed with me more than anything. And there's sort of like a bit of that quote from Paul McCartney is almost the ethos of Watch the Sound as a show, because we talk about sound is this thing in music that, of course, in music the most important thing is always going to be the song, the vocal, the performance. But then you go to that next level where you talk about arrangements, sonics, the kick, the snare, the 808, and that's the thing that makes the difference between a really good song and an iconic recording, like something we remember forever. Like when the needle goes down on track one, you're like, oh so that quote from Paul, like definitely, even though I hadn't thought about it before, is kind of like the symbolic fortune cookie statement of the show almost.
One of my favorite episodes, naturally, I mean, you can guess which one is one of my favorite episodes, is the one about sampling, is the one about leaning into that era that really, I think, initially united you and I and put us on the path to friendship, which was we're of a similar age, we were raised around similar hip hop, we have similar tastes. I love that record too. What's your favorite song? What's your favorite song? That kind of thing. So it's like, hearing you go and dive deep into that world with some of the people who really were there at the very beginning of it was super fascinating for me. I just wanted to ask you, as an individual, moving forward in your production work, even today, do you still feel like you have that mentality? Like, even though you're working with Queens of the Stone Age on a Queens of the Stone Age album with kick-ass players, and your job is to add another incredible record to their catalog, do you still have that hip-hop mentality in a room like that?
I think, yes. I think that the thing about it's always about drums and beat and rhythm and syncopation first. Like that's just where it's appropriate, obviously like on a ballad or something like that. Yeah, but as far as like, yes, it's always drums, and there's like, I think that that's sort of what always gives me this sort of kindred spirit thing with someone like Josh or people that aren't from the hip hop field, so to speak. Kevin from Tame Impala, like there's a rhythmic thing. That's why their shit's like fucking hard and funky and whatnot. But I think that it's weird because I'm coming back, and I don't know if this is as a result of doing this show or what, but I've sort of come a bit full circle in the past year and a bit or a couple of years. Like I think that coming back to the MPC and that style of production, or even if I'm doing the same stuff in Ableton, just like that hip hop feeling. I think I went so far from it for a long time because it was what I did, and I didn't get my break till my early 30s, but I've been making that kind of music, beat-based music, hip-hop, funk, whatever it was, for 15 years before I made it.
Isn't it safe to say that you were, to some degree, in the same space as Daft Punk were when they made Random Access Memories, that ultimately you can only sample so much of that at a certain point in your life, then you want to try and make the music that you're sampling and ultimately try to see how close you can get to the source. Whether you come back like you are today is sort of, we'll get there, but that's what I sort of always felt like Uptown was about, and even to some degree, your last album was getting to it, though that was more of a kind of electronic space, but getting to that place where it's like, hey, this is the stuff I would sample.
Yeah, I think so. You know, it's funny. The first time I ever met Guy from Daft Punk, it was like outside some bar in Paris, and he was like having this like, he just looked so cool, leather jacket, smoking a cigarette, and I went up to him and I was just like, who the doesn't go up to Daft Punk and ask them annoying questions or say how influential they are? But it would be stupid if I did it. And I was like, yo, I can't remember what record I was talking about. This was before Random Access Memories and Uptown Funk, probably like 2010. And I was like, man, this you made. He's like, yeah, but he's like, but you made something back to black that feels classic. Like you make, and I was like, yeah, but I'm like retro guy. Like you literally made like the new classic by the thing, and he didn't want to hear it. He really just like, it's funny that they were making Random Access Memories at the time, because in my head that now makes sense, because he was telling me like, no, but you made some that really sounded classic, and I was just. I always thought that that was interesting, because very like humble of him.
He was being humble, but he was always kind of confessing what was to come. To your point, he was like, you might think that I'm out here trying to search for this kind of mineral that's never been discovered, but I'm actually kind of more into gold and silver right now.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I know. I should have seen the signs.
Did it get you closer to understanding what that word retro has meant to you throughout your life? Because I've never, and I've said this to you before, I've never considered what you do to be retro. I've called it hip hop and funk and all those key genre words, but not retro. You work in a timeless space where those sounds sound as good today as they did back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. It's not like you're dialing back. And now you've been able to sort of pick that apart on this series. Are you closer to understanding that yourself?
Yes, I think that there's always things that I'm going to be drawn to, sounds from a certain era, the way that Tommy Brennick, from the Budos band, Dap Kings, Menahan Street Band, the way he plays guitars and riffs, like it sounds like someone who was raised on Steve Cropper and Wu-Tang. So like, and the sound of that I love so much. Like I'm drawn to these sounds. I didn't grow up in the 60s or 70s. It's not the sound of my youth. I have no affinity. I just don't know why I'm drawn to those sounds. So there's certain stuff I always used to, feel for Bruno. I mean, not that he was losing sleep over it, but it would make me angry when people go to a show and be like, "Yeah, it's this retro thing." It's like, because 10 incredible like young musicians are on stage like jamming out, playing the time of their life. Like I don't know if you could just say it's retro. It's just like a forgotten art form that they happen to be drawn to. But yeah, I don't. I used to really bristle at it, and I used it's like anything. After a while, you're just like, some people want to call me retro guy. Like that's cool. I'll just put my bell bottom pants on one leg at a time and go make some nice music today. So yeah.
One of the really great recurring conversations that happens through this TV series, Watch the Sound, is you getting to connect with Roger Lynn, who is one of the great unsung heroes of modern music. And I think that you finally tipped the balance with this series. For anyone who watches it will know now very clearly, because you're hitting us around the head with it, rightfully so. This piece of machinery and this individual is not only responsible for changing the sound of music, but it's been put into use and still to this day exists in The Weeknd's biggest hit record ever.
Yeah, no, it's so crazy because Roger Lynn had, first of all, the Lynn drum, which was the drum machine that was used on countless 80s records, and Prince, of course, to like the greatest effect using it. And then he invents the first, or like the one of the most popular sampler drum machines in the MPC, and like it's like a completely different like genre, and then the arm of music that he completely dominates with that too. So it's wild how his two inventions really just have their imprint on wildly huge amount of music that we love.
But I just love that he embraces it, because you also point out, a discrepancy between, and Questlove has some great things to say about this. The discrepancy between what was built for a purpose and how it ends up being used, and the division that created in a naive society. Really interesting moment in the series, I think, when you're talking about the SP and how, according to rumor, that was rejected by the company that made it, that it was being used in electronic music and specifically hip hop. And I love that you went there, because we've talked about this off the record, fans, for a long time, and you raised it to the surface.
Yeah, and because I remember reading that in a book because I love the David Byrne book, How Music Works, and I loved it so much that I read all the books that he referenced in that book. So there was another book, and I remember reading, I was like, I'm sure there's something about how the people that made the SP hated hip hop, and they were thinking of actually discontinuing the machine because they just, when they found out that what it was being used by Public Enemy and these things. So and when we went time to edit, because Apple obviously has a very, very thorough fact checking thing. You can't just say salacious rumors, like labeling people as like sort of, racially insensitive. And they had to check that one. And it did check out. It was in the book that they were quoted. They're like, yeah, we just didn't get hip hop, sorry, our bad. So and then that spins around, and Questlove really ties that to a lot of things like luxury brands that are kind of not very cool until they're embraced by street culture or whatever it is, things like and music and hip hop, like things like Timbaland and Armagnac. I mean, sorry, Armagnac is Jay's brand, but that was a direct reaction to him with the Cristal when the people from Cristal said something stupid like, "Oh yeah, I mean, it's cool that the rappers drink it, but it's not really where we want it at." And he was like, "Oh really?
Oh,
Watch your
okay.
stock
Yeah.
price tumble."
And watch me, yeah, and just watch my steps for the next 3 or 4 years.
So Questlove, draws the parallel to that, which is really interesting, and it is true. It's like there's this thing of that really is a common thread through our show, which is the happy accidents. Like something comes out, and everybody says, this is kind of bullshit. This drum machine, or it's going to replace drummers and musicians, or like throwing their arms up in the air, and then someone like Prince, a genius, comes along, uses it almost the wrong way from which it was intended, tunes the snare down so it sounds crazy, and then it's just incredible. And now we're still using it on records 40 years later.
Yeah.
And that's a happy accident is a real running thread of our show too.